March 22, 2022. 27 days of war. In less than a month of Russian occupation, over 3.5 million people have fled Ukraine. 6.5 million people have been internally displaced. That's nearly a quarter of the nation's population relocated due to war. Most, 2.1 million, have fled to Poland. The rest have gone to Romania, Moldova, Hungary, and Slovakia. A large number have also left Ukraine for Russia, about 250,000, and over 4,000 have fled for Belarus. Belarusians strongly oppose the war in Ukraine. Only about 3% of those surveyed approve of Russia's invasion. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko is a Putin ally. He has allowed Russia to use its southern borders to stage Russian troops and equipment for an invasion from the north. Belarusian activists regularly engage in sabotaging the efforts of the Belarusian government, with rail workers having disabled the rail system leading into Ukraine to prevent the delivery of supplies to Russian troops. Of the 3.5 million Ukrainian refugees, an estimated 40%, about 1.5 million, are children. UNICEF has issued a warning that refugee children face a high risk of being abducted and trafficked. UNICEF's regional director for Europe and Central Asia, Afshan Khan, says, quote, "Displaced children are extremely vulnerable to being separated from their families, exploited, and trafficked. They need governments in the region to step up and put measures in place to keep them safe," end quote. UNICEF and the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, have begun setting up Blue Dots. Those are one-stop safe spaces for children and women. They provide information and essential services for traveling families and help identify unaccompanied and separated children. And this is not a hypothetical danger. Yesterday, March 21st, 2022, Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs posted the following bulletin to its Facebook page, quote, "According to the information received on March 19th, the Russian occupation forces illegally deported to the territory of the Russian Federation 2,389 children who were in the occupied districts of Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Forced displacement of civilians into the territory of the aggressor state, including children, shows signs of abduction. Such actions are a gross violation of international law, in particular, international humanitarian law. By destroying homes and killing the parents, the Russian Federation deprives Ukrainian children of parental care and puts their lives in further jeopardy in Russia. We call on the international community to respond to the illegal removal of children, to increase pressure on Russia to make it stop the barbaric war against the Ukrainian people. The facts of abduction of children, as well as other facts of crimes of the Russian occupiers against civilians in Ukraine, are being investigated by law enforcement agencies. The perpetrators of these crimes will be brought to justice," end quote. The American embassy in Kiev tweeted about the deportations early in the morning of March 22nd, quote, "This is not assistance, it is kidnapping," end quote. These allegations appear to be part of another disturbing trend of Russians deporting Ukrainians to Russia. Lyudmila Denisova, Ukraine's human rights ombudsman, wrote via Telegram, quote, "In recent days, several thousand Mariupol residents have been deported to Russia. These are people from the left bank district of the city and the bomb shelter in the building of the sports club, where more than 1,000 people, mostly women and children, hid from the constant bombing," end quote. Further, quote, "It is known that the captured Mariupol residents were taken to filtration camps where the occupiers checked people's phones and documents. After the inspection, some Mariupol residents were transported to Taganrog and from there sent by rail to various economically depressed cities in Russia. Our citizens have been issued papers that require them to be in a certain city. They have no right to leave it for at least 2 years with the obligation to work at the specified place of work. The fate of others remains unknown," end quote. Denisov's comments were echoed in a similar post by Mariupol City Council via the Telegram messaging app. U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, told CNN's Jake Tapper on Sunday, March 20th, quote, "I can't confirm it, but I can say it is disturbing. It is unconscionable for Russia to force Ukrainian citizens into Russia and put them in what will basically be concentration and prisoner camps," end quote. The Associated Press reported that the number of people taken from Mariupol to Russia since May 5th may be as high as 3,000. Russia has failed to make progress in taking most major cities and has been pushed out of some areas by Ukrainian forces. However, in places where Russia has a strong presence, allegations of human rights abuses and violations are mounting. Many of these claims mirror allegations of forced deportations and abductions. The Washington Post on Sunday, March 20th, published a letter written by Ambassador Nell Crocker, U.S. Representative to the Office of United Nations, and addressed to the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, quote, "I would like to bring to your attention disturbing information recently obtained by the United States that indicates that human rights violations and abuses in the aftermath of a further invasion are being planned. These acts would likely target those who oppose Russian actions, including Russian and Belarusian dissidents in exile in Ukraine, journalists and anti-corruption activists, and vulnerable populations such as religious and ethnic minorities and LGBTQI+ persons. Specifically, we have credible information that indicates Russian forces are creating lists of identified Ukrainians to be killed or sent to camps following a military occupation. We also have credible information that Russian forces will likely use lethal measures to disperse peaceful protests or otherwise counter peaceful exercises of perceived resistance from civilian populations." End quote. Crimes against journalists follow the same pattern. 4 reporters have been killed by Russian troops to date, an additional 7 injured. Ukrainian radio and television broadcast towers have been the target of Russian missiles. Reporters Without Borders keeps an interactive map recording press freedom violations, assaults, injuries, disappearances, killings, and property damage. Most recently, Friday, March 18th, independent media outlet Hromadska announced that they had not heard from journalist Victoria Roshnia since March 12th. Witnesses last saw her in Berdyansk, and Hromadska believes she has been abducted by Russian forces. Writing from Mariupol yesterday, March 21st, video journalist Mstyslav Chernov reported to correspondent Lori Hinnant that Russian troops had been hunting him and photographer Evginiy Maloletka. Chernov and Maloletka had been documenting the worsening humanitarian crisis in Mariupol for over 2 weeks. While reporting inside a Mariupol hospital, Russian soldiers began searching the halls, rifles drawn, asking for the journalist by name. Chernov and Maloletka were given white scrubs by hospital staff to hide. A dozen Ukrainian soldiers showed up early the next morning, sent specifically to get the journalists to safety. A 10-minute journey through the streets of Mariupol took an eternity. Russian shelling was nonstop. Eventually, they were taken by armored car to a bunker. A policeman told them, "If they catch you, they will get you on camera and they will make you say that everything you filmed is a lie. All your efforts and everything you have done in Mariupol will be in vain." They were taken out of Mariupol in a Hyundai, crammed with a family of 3. It took 15 Russian checkpoints and a detour through fields and back roads to reach a Ukrainian checkpoint, having finally escaped Mariupol. They were the last journalists to leave Mariupol. The last official documentation of the horrors inside the city, which has been without food, water, gas, and heat for nearly a month. While tens of thousands of residents have been able to slowly evacuate over the weeks, there are still hundreds of thousands trapped. Chernov's and Maloletka's counterparts in Russian media, who for years have peddled the Kremlin's lies, are starting to break ties with state-run news networks. Marina Ovsyannikova, the former news editor for Russia's Channel 1, disrupted a live broadcast with a poster yelling, "No war." Channel 1's Paris correspondent Zhana Agulakova quit earlier this month and spoke at a conference organized by Reporters Without Borders today, March 22nd. Agulakova was a Channel 1 correspondent for 2 decades, believing her appointment as a foreign correspondent in New York and Paris would allow her to avoid pushing propaganda. She said at the conference, quote, "I didn't lie. Every fact was real. But take real facts, mix them up, and you'll end up with a big lie." End quote. On Ukraine, she said, "When in Russia we hear the word Nazi, we only have one reaction: destroy. It's a manipulation, a huge lie." Agulakova insists she is not alone in her beliefs, stating that many journalists and producers in Russia share the same feelings about the war. Said Agulakova, quote, "It's easy to accuse them, to ask why they don't resign, don't protest. But those who stay have families, elderly parents, children, houses to pay for. They are hostages of the situation." End quote. Since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, few Russian journalists have left state-run media outlets in protest. In addition to Ovsyannikova and Agulakova, NTV news anchor Lilia Gildiva and NTV's Brussels correspondent Vadim Glusker have both resigned in the past month. RT's Maria Baranova left RT almost immediately after the war began. While these resignations may be a glimmer of hope that truth will prevail in Russian media, there simply hasn't been a backlash strong enough to undo years of pro-Kremlin propaganda. While journalists and editors may indeed be hostages of the situation, as Agulakova insists, the damage inflicted has shaped an entire generation of Russians who have grown up under strict media control. Most Kremlin talking points reinforce Russian nationalism and foster paranoia of Western influence. Further, their status as hostages is a self-imposed one. In Ukraine, citizens face the same reality. families, elderly parents, houses to pay for, all uprooted, destroyed, driven from their homes by the propaganda pushed by Russian state media. On Sunday, March 20th, the last European Union diplomat evacuated from Mariupol, Greece's Manolis Androulakis, finally returned to Athens after a 6-day evacuation journey across Ukraine and Europe. Back in Athens, Androulakis described the situation in Mariupol, quote, "What I saw, I hope no one will ever see. Mariupol will be on the list of cities in the world that have been completely destroyed by war." End quote. He compared Mariupol to Grozny, Aleppo, Coventry, Guernica, and Leningrad. Mariupol is in the southeast of Ukraine. It is a port city on the Sea of Azov, a fact that we have mentioned about a dozen times on this show. It has a peacetime population of approximately 430,000, and it's estimated that not quite half have been able to evacuate. Russia claims that the people of Mariupol, and more generally the Russian separatists in the Donbass, want to be part of Russia. The relentless and indiscriminate shelling, the sheer destruction of the city, proves Putin does not actually care about this place or its people. What Putin cannot have, he will destroy. In an interview with public broadcasters today, March 22nd, Ukrainian President Volodomir Zelinskyy addressed comments he made in a CNN interview regarding World War III and what he would say to Putin in a meeting, as well as advice to the world as we watch the war unfold.
I would like to ask what you would say to Ukrainians when they see Russian troops through their windows, in their villages, towns. Also, in your interview to CNN, you mentioned that if negotiations with Putin fail, then there's a risk of World War III. What did you mean by that?
Третьої світової війни, що ви мали на увазі, а потім до українців.
Що я мав на увазі, це значить, що все ж таки
What I meant is that Putin doesn't have plans to end this war, as Ukraine is only a path he is going down, which is to continue on to Europe. First of all, taking Baltic states, countries that were part of the USSR, and then other countries that had Soviet armies and were under Soviet influence. I have been saying this to our partners, including Mr. Scholz, that they might end up with Russian troops at their borders. But then we can certainly see that it would be World War III. If our negotiations fail, then we can confidently say that it's not by accident that he's asking for demands that will be rejected by Ukraine. He's setting demands which we cannot agree to before saying they simply didn't want peace. And then Russia will go full force towards the borders of European or NATO countries. It would be World War III.
з країнами Європи чи країнами складу НАТО, це буде Третя світова.
Sure. Okay. If you were going to meet with Mr. Putin in 10 minutes.
In 10?
Yeah, why not?
In Kiev?
In Kiev. What would you do? What would you tell him? What will be your first sentence?
Я буду намагатися пройти все, що бентежить, і чим не
I will try to cover everything perplexing and say everything that Ukrainian people think,
детально,
in detail. And if I had the opportunity, we would cover every topic.
Повірте мені. Вирішимо ми їх всі? Ні.
Will we resolve them all?
Частину зможемо, хоча б
No,
зупинити війну,
but partially,
вирішити частину питань. І
most important of which is to stop the war
неможливо.
and let them understand that by destroying us, he will only destroy himself.
Я не хочу, щоб ми увійшли в історію.
I don't want us to be known in history as a nation that doesn't exist.
Мені, як президенту
As a president, I don't want this destiny for our country and people.
Але вони, якщо будуть знищені, у них навіть і героїзму не залишиться.
Mr. President, this is the biggest refugee crisis in Europe since the Second World War. 10 million people left their homes inside Ukraine. 3.5 million people are abroad. What would be your message to those people who are abroad and to people and countries who took them in?
Тільки одне, щоб захистити себе.
Everybody needs to become Ukrainian,
Навіть сучасне.
at least temporarily, to feel in their own skin, to know that it's a war and that you can lose everything, your life, and everything that matters to you. To feel that pain, not just be concerned. When you are feeling, you will do what you can to stop this. Because people, no matter who they are and what they do, they still think about themselves first, about their life. So what they can do for their own life is to be Ukrainians.
This was coverage for March 22nd, 2022. We're still encouraging listeners to check out the independent collective of volunteers helping Ukrainians escape, helpingtoleave.org. Over 300 international volunteers collecting data in real time, 24/7, and providing guidance to Ukrainians seeking to escape, helpingtoleave.org.